Before Slipknot shocked the world with jumpsuits and terrifying masks. Before Ghost started hiding behind papal robes and skull paint. There was one band, almost forgotten today, that may have done it first. And no, they didn't come from Iowa. This band didn't top the charts. They never filled arenas. Most people today don't even know they existed, but the mystery around them has become almost legendary among hardcore music fans and collectors. They called themselves the Residents, and they wore masks, always. Nobody knew who they really were. Not their fans, not the press, not even the people they worked with in the studio. Their faces were never shown, not even once. And unlike Slipknot, they never took them off, not even after decades of performing. What kind of band does that? What kind of group hides themselves for 50 years? Why go through so much effort just to remain anonymous? To understand the Residents, we have to go back to the early 1970s, when rock music was changing fast, and a strange group of artists decided to do things completely differently, not for fame, but for art. And what they created was terrifying, confusing, and somehow brilliant. It started somewhere in Louisiana, maybe in Shreveport. That's what the rumors say. But the exact truth? No one really knows. A few young guys moved from Louisiana to San Mateo, California in the late 60s or early 70s. They weren't trained musicians. They didn't have a big plan. They just started experimenting with sound. They played with tape loops, strange noises, odd instruments. They weren't trying to make hits. They were trying to make art. Weird, twisted, beautiful art. When they finally sent a demo tape to Warner Brothers Records, the label rejected it. But the rejection letter was addressed to the Residents because the band had sent the tape without a name, and the label just used Residents as a placeholder. The group thought that was perfect. They adopted the name The Residents and decided to build a whole career on not being known. They would never show their real names. They would never explain what their songs meant. They would never tell anyone who was really in the band. They became ghosts, even in real life. And their shows? Not like anything the world had seen. They wore giant eyeball masks with top hats. They moved in slow, robotic ways. Their music was chaotic, eerie, sometimes funny, always strange. It wasn't for everyone, but those who loved it really loved it. To this day, nobody can say with total certainty who the original members were, not even the biggest fans, and that's exactly what the Residents wanted. Imagine this. You walk into a dark concert hall. On stage, there are 4 figures standing still, not saying a word. They wear giant eyeballs on their heads, red veins, black pupils, no mouths. Each eyeball is topped with a black top hat, and as the lights flash, the sound that hits your ears isn't music, it's like a fever dream. Screeching, moaning, pounding drums, twisted melodies. This wasn't a band trying to be cool, they were trying to disturb you. And they were doing it long before Slipknot ever put on a mask. Their 1974 debut album, Meet the Residents, had a parody cover of the Beatles' Meet the Beatles, but with melted, grotesque faces replacing the Fab Four. The music inside was just as bizarre. It sounded like a broken music box trapped in a horror movie. But that was the point. The Residents weren't interested in being mainstream. They were telling stories through chaos. They mocked pop culture, challenged norms, and asked one question over and over: what is music really? Was it just something pretty to listen to? Or could it be a weapon, a puzzle, a mirror? Over the years, the eyeball mask became their symbol. Even if they experimented with other costumes later, the eyeballs always returned. In time, fans stopped asking who they were. They asked, what are they trying to say? By the early 1980s, the Residents had already made a name for themselves in the underground world. They weren't on MTV, they weren't on the radio, but they had something even more powerful: a cult following. They began making experimental films, released strange home videos, and created multimedia performances before anyone was even using that word. They predicted things about music videos and digital culture decades before they became mainstream. They also invented something called the theory of obscurity. According to this idea, art becomes more pure when the artist stays anonymous. If nobody knows who made the art, then the focus stays on the art itself, not the personality behind it, No egos, no fame, just the message. That theory became the foundation of everything the residents did. Even when they worked with known producers or guest musicians, they stayed silent in the background. When people asked who they were, they just pointed to their manager, a mysterious character named Homer Flynn, and said he represented them. But was Homer in the band? Nobody knows for sure. That's the brilliance and the frustration of the residents. Every time you get close to an answer, they twist the story again. Here's the strange part. Even though the residents were never famous, their influence is everywhere. From Slipknot to Daft Punk, from Gorillaz to Ghost, the idea of hiding behind masks or creating a separate character for music has become common today. But back in the 70s, the residents were the only ones doing it. They made music that was often unlistenable on purpose. They made concept albums about dying musicians, about the end of the world, about bizarre creatures and twisted fairy tales. Some of their records sounded like a children's TV show on acid. Others sounded like someone playing a haunted accordion in a dark basement. They didn't care if you liked it. They only cared that it made you feel something. Years later, many famous artists started giving the residents credit. Musicians from Primus, Tool, and even Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails all mentioned them as an influence. Even Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, said he was a huge fan. Still, the general public? They have no idea who the residents are. And maybe that's just how the band wanted it. In a world obsessed with fame, the residents were a complete rebellion. They never revealed their identities. They never gave in to pressure to normalize their sound, and they kept making art, even when nobody was paying attention. Over the years, theories have popped up. Some say the residents were just one guy. Others believe they were secretly a bunch of major artists hiding behind the eyeballs. Frank Zappa, Captain Beefheart, or even the Beatles themselves. All nonsense. But that's the thing. The mystery is the point. The residents didn't want to be known. They wanted you to be uncomfortable. They wanted you to guess, to question. Even after decades, they still kept the masks on. They performed live shows with high-tech visuals, weird storylines, and strange costumes. One show had them dressed as old people reflecting on their youth. Another had them dressed as insects. Nothing was off limits, but behind it all, those eyeballs watched in silence. Slipknot became a household name. Ghost won Grammys. Daft Punk took over electronic music. So why didn't the residents make it big? The answer is simple. They never wanted to. The residents were never chasing radio hits. They were never trying to be rock stars. Their music was too weird, too experimental, and sometimes too disturbing for most people. And yet, they never stopped. They've released over 60 albums. They've done hundreds of live shows. They've made short films, books, art projects. They've been working non-stop since the 1970s. In their own way, they've lasted longer than most mainstream bands, and their legacy is stronger than ever in the world of avant-garde and experimental music. They proved that fame isn't the only measure of success. Sometimes, the most powerful art comes from the shadows. Today, the residents are still around, new tours, new albums, new stories, still in disguise. The original members? Me have passed away, others have retired, nobody knows for sure, but the eyeball lives on. That mask, once a symbol of chaos and confusion, is now a symbol of freedom. Freedom from ego, from the music industry, from expectations. And maybe that's why their mystery still matters. Because in a world where everyone is trying to be seen, the residents remind us that sometimes the most powerful thing is to disappear. They weren't chasing fame like Slipknot, but in their own quiet, creepy way, they may have changed music forever,